Hey everyone, James from TeaDB here, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. So today, I was inspired about this episode by a question asked by Alejandro on the question and answer episode. So thank you, Alejandro. I did answer that question there, and it was specifically about diminishing returns on tea. I think it's interesting to think about, and I was reflecting on it. It's sort of question that I personally I personally like to think about a bit too, and just sort of how my relationship is to tea and how I approach buying and things like that. And I mean, the concept of diminishing returns is basically you can, as you increase the amount you spend, I like to think of it per gram for tea. So if I spent 10 grams versus 20 grams on tea, that at some point it would the 20 centigram tea would probably be better than the 10 centigram tea, but it wouldn't be twice as good. And maybe it'd still be worth buying, but you could double that again to 40 cents a gram, and maybe that's only like 10% better than your 20 cent per gram tea or something like that. So at a certain point, it wouldn't be worthwhile to buy it. Like something like the 88 Qing Bing, which costs like 12,000 per cake. I mean, that's something like using some back of the head math, that's like $36 per gram. So you're looking at something that's probably not 36 times better than a dollar gram tea, which is already quite expensive and high-end tea. So I was thinking about that, and I think for me personally, or one tea that I have bought a sample of recently is Yunnan Sourcing's Peerless Bronze Ripe Pu'erh. So Yunnan Sourcing does make some higher end ripe cakes, and this tea is one of those, and it is priced accordingly. So it costs, I believe, $80 for a 357 gram cake. So that's about 23 cents per gram. So that's well within the price range of tea I do normally buy. But the one interesting thing about it is a ripe tea, and I do not usually buy ripe tea in that price range. So a few reasons why. I think when it comes to buying a tea, you do need to hit sort of a minimum threshold. When it comes to raw, ripe, whatever, I could probably find tea that's 3 cents a gram and 4 cents a gram. That's probably okay. It's probably okay, but tea needs to hit sort of a minimum quality threshold in order to be worth buying. Even if those 3 cents a gram, 4 cents a gram teas could be just incredible value, especially when we're talking about something, I don't know, like a factory tea that's 10 years old, and you could get that for 3 cents a gram, 4 cents a gram. That might be an incredible value. But there's a couple. But if you're never going to drink that tea and it just sits around, then it's not a worthwhile purchase, and that can also be a waste of money. I think another thing is it depends a lot on context. In a lot of ways, it is sort of a personal choice and depends a lot on your habits of drinking teas. For me, I think back to 5 or 6 years ago, before I had moved in with my now wife. Something like ripe tea was not a regular brew at all for me. So what would make sense is so things like right now, for instance, I buy a lot of 10 cent a gram or so ripe pu'erh. And one of the reasons is you can find a lot of pretty decent ripe at that 10 cents a gram, 12 cents a gram range. Stuff like Munghai Tea Factory stuff you can easily find for that price or less. Yunnan Sourcing brand ripe, even white tea ripe, which tends to be a little more expensive, but you can definitely find decent quality ripe in those categories. For me currently, ripe tends to be more of a casual brew. So for me, I just tend to buy a lot in that range, and less so in this 22 cents a gram range, where I might buy a lot more of my raw, which tends to be more of a focus session. But if I were to rewind 5 or 6 years ago, things like ripe would be a more seldom brew. It'd be more rare. So buying a higher end ripe might make a lot more sense. So that doesn't necessarily even speak towards the quality difference between like a 10 cent and a 20 cent a gram ripe, but I think in the context of ripe, those tend to fit in a fairly similar flavor category in a way that something like raw may have a little more variety, and that adds a little bit more complexity to the equation. I think that also sort of tackles this idea of what is your alternate that you buy. If I'm not buying a 20 cent a gram ripe, I'm buying a 10 cent a gram ripe, like a Munghai Tea Factory. And for the purposes that I drink ripe, that 10 cent a gram ripe is good enough. And so generally I don't find the price difference to be worthwhile in just sort of the morning context when I'm drinking my ripe with my wife in the morning and then a little bit throughout the day. It just tends to be less of a focused brew, and I just don't find that the quality is worthwhile, even if a tea like this one is good. And I do enjoy sampling and trying these teas. So that's not to say this is a value judgment for everyone necessarily. So I think that kind of covers some of my thoughts on the diminishing returns on ripe. Especially, I think it's cool to see higher end ripes such as these, and I think it does hold a lot of appeal for people. So I'm looking forward to trying this ripe on camera and seeing what you all think of this tea too. So Scott produced 2 Peerless ripes in 2020. I tend to try to buy Scott's ripes the year that they're made before there's a price bump. His price bumps are very predictable. So this one is the more expensive one. It's $80 for a 357 gram cake. So again, that's pretty expensive for a ripe cake, but not at all a crazy amount to spend on a raw cake. So I was curious to try this. All right, let's get on to the tea. Okay, so I am drinking the Peerless Bronze ripe here, so thank you to Scott for producing this tea. I have just finished my sample, so this is my last go on this tea. Here is steep number 4, the remainder of it, and while that's going, I'm going to make steep number 5 here as well. Using about 9.5, 10 grams here for a 250 milliliter or so, big pot. So this tea is Linchong material. Frankly, I tend to drink more Munghai area factory material. Tends to be what I like. I don't have any specific dislike of Linchong Pu'erh, but that's just what I tend to drink more often. Part of that is just because I drink Munghai Tea Factory productions as well as Scott's productions that he makes from those areas. So yeah, this will be interesting to try. Should have a little bit of a different flavor profile than those. All right. In that here. So I don't know how long that was, maybe 45 seconds or so. To talk a little bit more about some of my thoughts on hitting those points at which you choose to buy. I think a lot of it is just you'll have different sweet spots on what's the good sort of price range to buy from, and you'll have just sort of natural inclinations for certain tea categories. For me, ripe tends to be in that 10 cents a gram range. For me, raw tends to be more in that anywhere between 10 cents to 40 cents a gram or so. I will buy raw that's a little more expensive now and then. I think for raw also has more variety, so there's almost like ripe sort of just occupies a range of here to here, whereas raw I feel like is much broader, maybe like here to here, as far as like different notes and things you might get. So I own a lot more different variety of raw, whereas you can get some interesting ripes, such as like the Lao Mani ripe that Denny and I recently had on the episode. But for me, that falls into a category where I just wouldn't want to drink that all that much. Okay, so enough babbling about that. Let's drink this tea. A little bit of those cherry notes coming off that aroma that Denny likes. Haven't gotten a ton of that from the brews so far, so that's kind of interesting. So it has a real nice body. It also has good texture. Those are the two things I sort of immediately noted on this tea versus kind of your more everyday ripe for myself, is it has that enhanced texture and body. It's almost a little less sweet and smooth, and it sort of has an edge to it that I don't normally get from ripe. It makes me wonder if like perhaps this is more of a moderate to light fermentation process where you're maintaining more of that oomph in the tea. some vanilla notes as well. All right, so here is the next steep. So steep number 5, I believe. 5, 6, I don't know. This tea seems like it's going quite strong too. Brewing a pretty dark color here. Almost like kind of that syrup mouthfeel. Lingers in the mouth too, sort of like, it's not thin, but it has that sort of slickness that you'll get sometimes from these teas. Actually pretty different from most of the ripe I drink normally. Cheers. So I'd say sort of a mix between that vanilla and that wood. So yeah, quite enjoyable overall, I'd say. Do I find this tea head and shoulders above Scott's other ripes? No, I don't. But that's partially because I like a lot of Scott's other ripes too. I do think this is definitely well above average. Well above average. I do find it is above average. Not to just contradict myself in the next 20 seconds, but yeah, I do think this is definitely one of his better ripe teas. But personally, it's something that it is good. It's not something I would rush out and buy, which is a reaction I had for more something like the Bawang, which is a tea that for me personally hits a lot of my sweet spots there. I think that tea is probably running around the same price as this now. It's probably been hiked up once on price because it's, I think, a year and a half old or so. But yeah, I'd say this is quite good. I gave the Bawang a 6.6, so I'd probably mark this just slightly under. So yeah, we'll call it a 6.5. I think in terms of like texture, in terms of body, this tea has a lot to offer. I think Denny in particular would probably really enjoy this tea. It's also one of those ripes that's pretty consistent, steep in and steep out. The flavor profile when I was having it this morning is still pretty similar to what it is now. So it may indicate that this is sort of a smaller run ripe coming from probably maybe just a couple of different areas rather than something that's drawing from all over the place. So yeah, it's interesting. Don't know what the average leaf grade for this tea is, but it's given pretty good strength overall. So yeah, I think this is a ripe worth sampling for sure to see if it sort of hits your spots. Totally different from Scott's like Lao Mani and stuff like that. I think one of the cool things about Scott's site, of course, is that you can sample from so many different categories. So if you're sort of looking to just like try a couple different high-end ripes, I'd recommend something like this. Try his Lao Mani too, totally different. I'd rather personally drink this tea than that tea, but that tea is 100% very unique, and I think gives you sort of some hints of some of the interesting experimentation that producers are doing with ripe teas. All right, so I think that just about concludes this episode. So check out this tea. Good texture, good body, good northern material included in it. Kind of wish I sampled Scott's other Peerless ripe too. I think that's also Linchong material. A couple villages were mentioned in the description there. So I may end up doing that at some later point. Let me know how you liked this episode. Hopefully it was coherent enough, my ramblings, that they made some sense to some people. So let me know how you liked it, and I will see y'all next time.